I've come to the conclusion that human beings, it's not always necessary to have everyone on the bus. I'll start with that. I think it's a critical mass thing. And like change, like strategy, I think that, when you try and engage too many people, I think you can end up with analysis paralysis. You can end up with month-long, years-long kind of engagement strategies. But if you're very clear about who you're engaging, what their purposes are, setting really clear boundaries around that, in fact, we're going to have lots of people. People deliver infrastructure. That's the reality. And sure, technology, robotics, different forms of manufacturing, they are absolutely going to have a positive impact on creating more efficiency. But if AI is used inappropriately, if it's used to try and replace the human connection, I think that's...
Infrastructure is under pressure. Projects are getting larger, timelines tighter, and expectations higher. Yet, productivity has barely moved. For years, the conversation has centred on efficiency. Do more with less. Cut out, reduce layers, streamline delivery. Now, with the rise of AI, that pressure has only intensified. But what if the industry is asking the wrong question? What if the real opportunity is not about replacing people, but about unlocking their full potential? Daryl has spent his career working across sectors that operate at a completely different level of productivity and performance. He has seen what happens when teams are aligned, when leadership is clear, and when people are truly enabled to do their best work. Through his work with Struber, he is challenging the way infrastructure thinks about growth, capability, and technology, not as a shortcut to efficiency, but as a catalyst for better outcomes. This conversation explores what it really takes to accelerate infrastructure delivery, why leadership accountability matters more now than ever, and how AI can either amplify progress or accelerate the wrong direction entirely. Welcome to the Building Doors podcast. Look, I wanted to start with, and one of the questions I always ask guests is how they came into the construction and infrastructure industry. Mm-hmm. But I want to learn more around your, I suppose, background in, leadership and your journey into this sector, because I think it's interesting. You've had a lot of different companies and different experiences that led you to the role you're in today. So give us a little bit of a snapshot of your journey.
Sure. Well, I have had a bit of a goat trail of a career journey, which has taken me to lots of different industries and more recently infrastructure. Although through all of those other industries, I had numerous touch points with infrastructure, in fact led infrastructure projects and was involved in many different ways. But yes, I've worked across healthcare, telecommunications, e-commerce, logistics. I've worked in education and I've worked in consulting in professional services. I think I've remembered them all, but yes, I've worked across a number of different sectors, and I've seen lots of different ways of solving problems, lots of different ways of leading. And so, I came to infrastructure through the consulting and professional services perspective. Spent the last several years in that sector, and now at Struber, which specialises in infrastructure. Look, I am I really am reveling in the whole space of infrastructure. It's very familiar to me in the sense of, highly complex, high value, nation building projects. And I just love the challenges that really infrastructure is facing.
Tell me about some of the challenges you think infrastructure is going to face that we should start to be equipped for.
Sure. Look, I think it's facing some of the same challenges that everyone is facing. Technology, AI, pace of change. That's a ubiquitous thing now. But I think infrastructure is facing the unique challenge of coming from a pretty low base, particularly in productivity. I think the research that I recently came across suggests that productivity levels in infrastructure are in fact 2% below where they were in the year 1990. So given all the things that have happened since the year 1990, the introduction of the internet, mobile phones, all of the productivity ways of working, leadership development, you name it, we're still sitting at that very, very low base. So we've got a long way ahead of us And as you alluded to in the prelude, I think there's some risk as well that accelerating an inefficient model can sometimes make things worse. And so I think some of the challenges that infrastructure face are really firstly setting itself up to take advantage of some of those opportunities to accelerate, but doing it in a way that is going to help them kind of leapfrog maybe what they lost in the last couple of decades to actually realising the full potential of the future.
So what I found fascinating about you is you've worked in different sectors before, and one of the things you spoke to me about in the past is that there's something really powerful when everybody's moving in the one direction, or in a business and it's hard to get into that place. Tell me about other roles in your past experiences that you've had that really shaped you as a leader.
Good question. Look, I've had probably a couple of experiences in my career where I really felt that momentum. And when I say that, I mean in a very large organisation. One example was at Telstra in the telecommunications area. And there was a period of time under David Thodey, who was a very, very incredible CEO, where the momentum that was created and the alignment that was created amongst a very large organisation at the time was about 55,000 people. It felt like a tsunami. It felt like we were all on this huge wave, and it was a unique feeling in large organisations that I've worked in where, in fact, it almost feels the opposite, like everybody's pulling in different directions and it's hard to feel where the direction actually is going. But in that instance, there were a number of things that happened that really aligned the entire organisation. There was just absolute explicit clarity for a period of time, and it drove such progress in such a short amount of time. It was actually exciting to be part of. And so there were other examples like that, but I think there were probably some things I've taken away that have shaped me, that have helped to, I've tried to find again, in other roles and in latter parts of my career that I think probably were part of the things that helped to create that. Some of those things, in my view, one was probably incredible clarity around strategy. And I know that sounds like it's a bit esoteric, but it was really true. I mean, David was an incredible communicator. Every single time he walked into the room, you felt like he was relating everything back to the strategy. I'm sure he, and now I, trying to practice those sorts of things, just get sick of, repeating the strategy in every forum and environment, but it's critical that you do as a leader. And if you're not feeling like you're sick of it, then you're probably not doing it enough, and so it has to be from the top, absolute and clarity. The other thing that really helped in that environment was a governance system that was aligned to it as well. Like they developed from the board level down a whole range of aligned committees and decision-making groups with absolute clarity on what they were doing. They were managed super well. They were led by leaders. They weren't seen as administrative or time-consuming or waste of time. They were considered to be the place where the decisions were going to be made and the actions were going to come from, and everything was revolved around it, and so that was another kind of key feature. And probably a third one I would say is within teams was kind of hyper effective communication. And by that I mean, the meetings were never wide ranging. They didn't, there was never a meeting that had 10 different things trying to be covered. The meetings were super clear, really narrow in focus, and had very, very clear outcomes, actions, and momentum as a result of it. And so, and very specific in terms of who was there. I've been in a lot of meetings where too many people are invited. We try and cover too many topics. People use the excuse of, while we're here, we may as well tackle these other things, even if they're not relevant to everybody. Those sort of meetings are the ones I feel start to take away from momentum, And so, that clarity in communication, I think, was probably another key feature that I observed.
You've said this to me in the past. So you said on average it has to be repeated 7 times, the strategy, from a communications perspective. Where do you think leaders go wrong at times in terms of, because you've worked with so many different organisations over the years, where do leaders make mistakes in terms of articulating the strategy, do you think?
Yeah, well, it's that statistic actually comes from some decades old marketing research actually, where marketers who are trying to change behaviours of buyers, get them to buy something, have learned that in fact to raise awareness around an issue you might need to communicate 1 to 3 times, but if you want to change someone's behaviour, it has to be at least 7 times. And usually via different channels, and so it could be an email plus a team communication plus a visual or a video or different channels. And the reason for that is that people learn in different ways. So not everyone is some people are auditory learners, some people are visual learners, etc. And so that research is something that I've taken into my career, and have realised that sending an email is not enough. So going to your point, that where are leaders falling down? Well, I think they're confusing awareness with changing behaviour, and a lot of the activities they're really expecting, strategy is an example, we're typically not just trying to raise people's awareness around the strategy, we're trying to get them to do something about it and change their ways of working, change their behaviour. And to do that, you need to, as a leader, in my view, I think, and it's a real challenge, by the way, I'm not saying this is easy, but when you're trying to change behaviour, you've got to try and think about a multifaceted communication strategy that has more than 7, not just 7, but more than 7 different channels and or occasions where you're trying to actually get a message across to people if you're really wanting them to change the way they do things.
One of the things that I find really interesting about strategy, and this is just something that's come up recently, just talking to clients about, having to adapt, as businesses, changing economic conditions, changing, having to be agile and adapting to the business growth or business direction. What about when you've got a strategy and some of the team aren't on the bus? This is, I think, really an interesting one that sometimes, and you've worked with businesses to the size of Telstra, but you've also worked with, prior to your role now, smaller founder-led businesses where the people that started within the company aren't always the people that go right through. So I suppose I'm asking, a tough question too about what about when you're going in a direction, how do you determine whether everyone's on the bus?
It's a really good question. Look, I've come to the conclusion that human beings, it's not always necessary to have everyone on the bus. I'll start with that, I think it's a critical mass thing. And like change, like strategy, I think that it's not always about trying to get everyone on the bus. I don't think you possibly can. There'll always be a distribution of people, those advocates, those people that are kind of indifferent, and then those people who are laggards or, just will never get on the bus, And so I think the important thing is to focus more on building that critical mass, and not always. In fact, sometimes you can waste an exorbitant amount of time trying to get every last person on the bus. And in fact, that is what holds you back. It holds back all of those other people who are ready to push forward while you're there trying to drag every last soul on the bus. So I've got a view that in fact, critical mass is where you should focus. Momentum is really important. And I think if you focus there, at least initially, sometimes those laggards eventually do come on board, but they won't come on board because you drag them. They'll come on board because they see that actually it has become real and it is the direction. And so I think that, going to your point around, how do you determine if everyone's on the bus and so on? Look, I'd actually flip it and sort of say the opposite. I think in the last 3 organisations I've been in where I've developed a strategy or led the development of a strategy, actually what's more important than trying to figure out who's not on is actually realising that people are on without you even needing to try and bring them on. So an example would be, I remember in my last organisation, we built a strategy. We hadn't even released it. We'd had a lot of interaction with staff. We'd brought a lot of people on the journey. We put a lot of effort into that. And before it was even released, I had people coming up to me going, you know what, Daryl, we've already started, driving forward on the strategy. We're doing A, B, C. And all I could think was, wow, that is so insightful. In fact, I wouldn't have ever thought of those ideas, but you're already doing it. And then immediately after that, I thought, I haven't even given you the strategy yet. It hasn't even been released. But the way that we'd brought people on the journey was so effective that they already knew where we were going, and I think there's nothing more effective than a strategy that it's people are so on the journey early on, they're already embracing it so much that the document in the one pager or whatever it is not even the main thing, that's driving activity. It's all, the momentum's already going. And so, I know that's a different way of looking at it, but that's probably, trying to empower those champions, those advocates is probably a more powerful focus than trying to drag every last, soul on the bus, as we said.
How did you do it? How did you get people, because, to be passionate about it and to understand it without really having to clarify it at that in that document or whatever the case was? How were you doing it?
That's a really good question. I think there's a couple of things I've learned in my career that have helped me to engage people better in strategy. So a couple of the common failings that I've seen over 20 years, one is trying to treat everybody as equal. And by that, what I mean, an organisation says, right, we're going to start a strategy, we're going to start, engaging various groups or cohorts within the organisation and really just bringing together either random groups of people or department groups of people or a whole range of models that effectively are treating everyone in the organisation as an equal. And whilst I'm a very big believer in equity and equality in organisations, that's not my point here. However, in strategy, certain people have a greater agency, certain people on certain issues within the strategy are subject matter experts, and certain people might be a good generic representative of an organisation. And so I've basically, come up with strategies that really try and hone in on those things like, okay, the leadership group, they've got a very specific role, obviously, in the strategy. Not unusual that they will be making all the final decisions. They'll be, operating at a higher order level of what are the main kind of moving pieces of this strategy. And then trying to break it down into the other key influencers, the subject matter expert groups, the people who might be, representative of a staff group, but not necessarily just by department or just by kind of random assignment to the strategy, but very intentional kind of engagement with certain groups at certain times. And in fact, although that sounds like that's a lot of work, actually it reduces the work significantly. When you try and engage too many people, I think you can end up with analysis paralysis. You can end up with, month-long, years-long kind of engagement strategies. But if you're very clear about, who you're engaging, what their purposes are, setting really clear boundaries around that, in fact, it speeds up the engagement process and probably, in my view, makes it far more effective overall.
So tell me a bit about what you've seen. I'm interested because you've been in and around infrastructure, worked in other areas, anything from, your Telstra-sized business, Australia Post, through to other founder-led businesses. What are we getting wrong in infrastructure? What are some of the mistakes we're making?
Look, I think, firstly, I will say that, well, it's not just me. I think Infrastructure Australia, in a paper I recently read, said, the three key things that are holding back productivity in infrastructure in Australia right now are communication, collaboration and culture, which, to be frank, I wasn't really expecting that from Infrastructure Australia, that those three, what are sometimes referred to as soft aspects of leadership and business, are the three key things holding back productivity in infrastructure. But I actually completely agree with it. Everything that I've seen on high-performing industries and organisations, it actually all falls down back to those three things again. So I think one probably key first step is that infrastructure needs to recognise and value those things more. They're often seen as a nice to have or as a side gig or whatever, but actually the human constraints are the main things that are holding back infrastructure projects. Everything from, the way that we set up agreements between each other, the way that our teams are, critical startup occurs in organisations, the way that governance is set up, the way that teams work and communicate together, and also the culture. These are things that are either, accelerators in projects or are some of the biggest inhibitors. And so, I feel that, resetting some of those things, firstly, valuing them more highly, that's probably my number one advice, and realising that actually there are millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in return on investment on getting those three things right. Whereas everyone's more technically focused. They're more focused on, did we put the bridge in the right spot, or, build the right material for this particular issue. Not that they're not important. They're absolutely critical in infrastructure, but we've got to more highly value and weight those human constraints, because they're the things that are actually holding back projects.
It's interesting as well, because I sometimes come up in resistance, even just as our business, because obviously my background being psychology and wanting to look at things like neuroscience and PRISM and things like that. And sometimes people are like, oh, isn't it enough just to see the piece of paper? The person's got the experience on the resume. Do we need to understand how they build their behaviours and things like that? So I see it too. So I definitely resonate with the fact that, as an industry, I think we're starting to look closer at that, because we need to, because also we're moving in the direction that we are not going to have enough people to do all the work, particularly in Queensland. So we need to get not only with productivity, but also harnessing the skills and experience and getting better usage out of the people that we do have, because gosh knows they can't work any more hours. You know what I mean? Like that's something that's it's not that. So my question to you as well is, AI. People are talking about AI. Is AI this magic bullet solution? AI is going to solve everything with the productivity, AI and technology. And you and I have talked about this before. Tell me a bit about the role AI plays, and also the danger of AI if we don't do it right.
All right. Well, look, I'm a huge AI advocate and have upskilled myself to be able to, position my skills for the future as well. I think AI absolutely is the most phenomenal technology in our lifetimes. I think that the potential is amazing if harnessed correctly. And by that, I mean, I think part of the challenge, and I'm probably going back to an earlier point I made, that I think if you have bad data, bad systems, bad processes, bad culture, bad communication, and you throw AI into that, actually it could make things worse faster. And, I always liken, businesses who are, they've got parts of their business that are unproductive or parts of their business that are unprofitable. And yet the people there are doing their best and, going to work every day and driving things forward. But actually the faster and the more productive you make them, you can actually drive more unproductivity or lower profitability if you accelerate that. So we've got to be careful where we put it. I think it's a big leadership opportunity, actually. I think it's probably one of the biggest leadership opportunities that, going back to the, even traditional sense of strategy, like we talked about before, I mentioned how organisations where I've seen strategic clarity from the top, driven every conversation, every meeting, every interaction, that is the level of leadership that's needed with AI. Because we can end up with 10,000 people in an organisation all pulling in different directions fast, right? And lead to more inefficiency and actually even worsening productivity, in my view. And so, from my perspective, some of the things that can help with that clarity around leadership, leaders actually skilling themselves up firstly, so they have some idea what they're talking about. I think it's not good enough to just delegate AI to the rest of the business. Actually, no more. That will never work, because you need to have a reasonable appreciation of how things work, the potential available, and then how to lead people in that context, which is a vastly different way of leading, in my view. So yeah, there's some of the things that I think with AI, being careful about, not just accelerating the wrong things, but vice versa, actually identifying use cases that the business wants to apply AI to, giving people a project, a task, a focus to drive their AI activity, in particular while they're learning, can be one of the most powerful ways to really ensure that the tool is being used for purposes that are going to drive the organisation forward, be aligned to strategy, and help to avoid that problem of it just diverging, activity to even vast, wastelands of areas that aren't going to necessarily help the business go forward.
So what are we asking? Are we asking a lot more of leaders now? Like if we've got technology like AI, and as you said, it's so powerful, what is changing in the leadership landscape of what we need from our CEOs and our business leaders?
Look, I believe the impact is ubiquitous at every level, to be honest. But I think particularly with leaders, the change is if we thought that some of those things I mentioned earlier about strategic clarity, good communication, building a positive culture, collaboration amongst teams, like these sort of things, if we thought they were important before, those skills of a leader to drive those things, then they are orders of magnitude more important now. And that's the problem I think that leaders face, that it's one of those things, either you get on board quick, you get up to speed yourself, understand the technology and the tool, the capability. You don't need to be an expert, but you need to have an understanding, and then try and reorient. Okay, now with that in mind, how do I then build and lead a team? What capabilities do I need, to drive that? What capabilities do I now not need is another question. And I think trying to lead in that world is, in my view, I'm challenged every day, with trying to unlearn. I think that's probably the hardest part. Like, I thought something would normally take this amount of time, and I've been actually using an example in my current organisation. I think, we had a couple of projects recently where, I might have delegated this project to a team of, 5 people, and it might have come back in like 2 or 3 or 4 months of work. And actually, I've been able to actually lead with a very small group of people in a matter of days to get super complex, high quality, outcomes and outputs from things that I previously didn't think was possible. And now with that new frame of reference, I now think that like that with everything. I think, okay, well, if we can do that complexity of stuff that fast with such a efficient team of people that are smart and know how to use AI, then it opens your world, to a whole range of other opportunities.
I've been thinking about this a lot as well. So if you think of the profile of some of your founder-led businesses, and generally, well, you don't become a founder. Well, in some cases, I'm sure it's possible, but generally, a founder has some level of entrepreneurship, that entrepreneurial type of approach, which can often lend itself to innovation, embracing technology. Is there an advantage for small to medium businesses with that agility? Like, how are big organisations going to keep up with the rapidly changing landscape of AI in these massive myriad organisations?
I think it is a massive advantage. I mean, AI is the great leveler. At the simplest level, I've been one of my previous jobs was in education, and I remember having a conversation about how AI has just transformed the opportunities available for people with English as a second language. Once upon a time, the ability to write or craft things in eloquent ways or high quality ways was people with English as a second language was significantly disadvantaged. Now, the playing field is level. They can adopt this sort of technology and enhances their own ability to communicate immensely, much faster. Same goes for small businesses versus large. In fact, now I'm in Struber, the business that I work for now. I honestly believe that we have the greatest advantage against any of the large competitors that we work with, because we have already adopted AI to the nth degree. We and we're using it safely and securely and effectively, both internally and more to enable clients that want that. But it's a huge advantage. I mean, we can punch well above our weight. You know, we can develop things in lightning speed at incredible levels of quality because we've got people who are agile in a business that is, you know, incredibly encouraging and supportive of it. And so, you know, our founders, Julie and Dion Castle, are entrepreneurial, absolutely by nature, and technologically savvy, and that's, you know, infused the culture. It's helped to give permission to people to go, I should learn this and really figure it out. And so we're well in front of, I think, many, in fact, possibly all of our peers, to be honest. I think I can't imagine many organisations being further ahead than us on this issue. But it does come back to, you know, that the way that we're implementing it, the clarity with which it's being done. It's not just an open slather, hey, we've bought some Copilot licenses, good luck everybody, or, you know, here's how to do a basic query and, you know, away you go. It's been very intentional, it's very focused, and the building blocks just exponentially increase.
Tell me about some, I'd love to hear like a case study, like a real life example of somewhere that you used AI that produce far better quality work than without it. And obviously, tell me, can you think of an example?
Oh, look, I had a recent example. I think it was a classic, actually. It was a new staff member that joined our organisation who joined us from South Africa, and she was a marketing lead, and her role was quite an important new role for us. It was quite strategic in that it was aligned to some really important things we were trying to do as a business. And so I personally got involved in her onboarding, met with her 3 times in 2 weeks. She appreciated it greatly because a lot of the new things I was bringing to the business were kind of probably best delivered from me. And so I shared some information, some perspectives that I'd learned from the industry and the business. Anyway, I remember quite clearly at the end of the second week, this is her second week in the organisation, and she was contacting me to say, hey, Daryl, could we catch up? You know, I'm really, you know, excited to show you something that I've developed. And it was a little bit of context. I remember saying to her, you know, in the meeting prior, I said something to the effect of, it was like a dreaming conversation. I was like saying things like, you know what, one day in like 12 months, wouldn't it be amazing if we were able to capture, because this data is publicly available, like, you know, all of the infrastructure projects in Australia, you know, capture them in a net, you know, be able to dive into any one of them and find out all the key information that we want to find out, you know, what stage they're at in their project, what tenders they got going, you know, who's who in the zoo, you know, all of those sorts of things. And wouldn't it be amazing, you know, if we were able to, you know, provide that as a tool to our staff so they could, you know, help them to navigate, and we could build on it, you know, we could add to that content and integrate it with, you know, some of our customer management tools and such things. And she's like, oh, that's a really great idea. Anyway, so this would have been 2 or 3 days after that discussion, and she said, Daryl, I've got to show you this thing. And so she brings up this tool that she's used some AI to help develop. And I wouldn't be overstating it to say that I think it was the most impressive thing a staff member has ever given me in my whole career. Like, that's how significant it was. I looked at it and I was mind blown, right? Just couldn't believe what I was seeing. And it wasn't a generic thing. It was aligned to our strategy. It was aligned to the key kind of, you know, target customer groups that we're targeting. It was, she was able to identify the key capabilities that we have as a business and the aligned pain points that were found in the media or in other research that we've done or from our customer management system, all pulled together. And this entire kind of pipeline, you know, the entire infrastructure projects in Australia, prioritised, sized, you know, qualified, aligned, right down to, hey, this is the group that you should probably be talking to because they have, you know, they need what you have. I was blown away. This is the end of the second week of a new staff member. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. I mean, that's just one day. I mean, almost every day now in the last several months, I think I've had my mind blown, you know, and so, I mean, what we all hoped and dreamed was possible in months, years, or in a perfect world, if you had the best staff member or whatever, it's becoming possible more often if you have fully embraced these things. So I think that's, businesses like ours, are going to, in my view, leapfrog other businesses who are slow off the mark or just don't see the value or whatever, don't have the capability. It's going to create a huge gap, in the system, those that can or do and those that don't.
One thing I find really interesting too, and you touched on it before, we're at this real catalyst right now where we need AI to almost, accelerate us moving in the right direction as businesses, and with the right input, help us do more of the right things in line with the strategy and where we need to head. But also the danger is, and I see this, and I think we both work in professional services, the danger is using AI to take away the human element, because one thing I'm noticing is that people are craving connection more than ever before. And so the danger sometimes, I think, in organisations as well that I wanted to talk about is that they start to use AI, and we see it in the work that we do, right? They start to use AI in their outreach to people, or they start to use AI. I see it, we all see it in your LinkedIn emails. One, I counted, I had one that I've not replied to that I have received 6 different versions of the same message through a bot. So I think that the interesting stage we're at right now is AI has this immense capacity for this real deep research analytical data that can be so powerful. And on the counter, it also can be very dangerous if it's used to replace. And I think what we might see is people craving more of those things you talked about before as well. Let's talk about that. How do we use AI to accelerate those things that we know it can do at an amazing level, but without losing the human element? Well,
that is at the heart, I think, of those businesses that will truly excel because of AI and those that don't. I alluded before to the notion at Struber about our very intentional use of AI and also where we don't use AI, and I think that, and also Struber as a business, I mean, it's grown up, its whole identity, its whole DNA, its capability set is all around unlocking the human constraints in infrastructure. So it's all about humans, right? The whole value proposition. And so we know better than most that is, well, that's what we believe as well. We think that, humans and humans will always, and a lot of humans in my view, maybe slightly less in the future, maybe the long-term future, but there's going to be a lot of humans involved. I go, to job sites, see 10,000 people on a job site, and think this is not going away anytime soon. We're going to have lots of people. People deliver infrastructure. That's the reality. And sure, technology, robotics, different forms of manufacturing, they are absolutely going to have a positive impact on creating more efficiency. But if AI is used inappropriately, if it's used to try and replace the human connection, I think that's when it's highly likely to fail. Now, that said, I mean, if I take an example like, I'm a true believer in actually personally being involved in very specific things in an organisation, communicating the strategy and the vision, not delegating that, and just if I take that as an example, if I'm trying to craft a speech or a presentation or something in that order, I could have spent a week, 2 weeks sometimes, labouring on those things and I would often do it myself because it was one of those things that I wanted to keep personal. I didn't want to delegate it to someone and have them come back with a generic communication on some topic that for me was actually quite critically led by me. And so I would go away and do those things. Now I can craft those things 10 times faster. And it is by me. It is my voice. It is my work. It is my thoughts. But it accelerates a lot of that thinking time. It accelerates a lot of the white space that sits on my paper going, where am I going to start with this? And it just helps me to more clearly and efficiently articulate what I really wanted to say without me having to just rely on the slow connections in my brain, which sometimes are slow, to try and fire away for weeks or months to try and get there. It just accelerates that learning process so much. And so, to me, not forgetting who you are, not forgetting as a leader what's important, and then using AI like I just described, to supercharge that. That's when AI is amazing.
What's it giving you more time to do? Because one of the things people have always been scared of AI replacing jobs, that's the narrative we often hear, that it's got to replace people, and that's the concern of some. But then there's also the time it frees up for us to focus on other areas that might be even more important as a leader. What are some of the things that have opened up for you because you have that support?
Look, I think it stops a lot of time wasting. I think I'm like most humans. I procrastinate. I need breaks. I can't operate at a certain level on certain things all of the time. I've got to change my focus on busy work to deep work and so on to be most productive. Everyone works a bit differently, but that's the way I work. And in between, there's a lot of waste. There's a lot of time spent just twiddling thumbs or wondering what to do next. Or I think a lot of that has disappeared, which most of that, not all of that actually, I think downtime is really important and kind of for your wellness and for your for my effectiveness. I find that pausing is just as important as going. But when I'm going, I find that I'm enjoying it much more. Like, normally, I was working on something the other day where I remember a similar project in another organisation before AI. I would have gone backwards and forwards with specialist teams like 20, 30 times to correct something or adjust something or check on something and there would have been this constant to and fro, which would have happened by email. It's over days and days and days, asynchronous sort of thing. Now it's all synchronous. Like I'm just like, I'll ask AI, what is the situation with this? Or, even looking at our own data, can you give me the data on blah, blah, blah? I didn't have to go to Jerry or Joe or, I was able to just be productive, and get things done without having to, have a lot of that waste backwards and forwards and that, stop-start sort of time. So that's one thing. But to your point about, this notion that AI is going to replace a lot of jobs and maybe that's the main benefit to be gained, I think I don't agree with that. I actually think, and I was actually thinking the other day, like, so say you had 100 staff and just hypothesize, let's say they were all super effective using AI, and you could make every individual on average 3 times more productive. Let's just hypothesize that was possible. So that means you could get 300% improvement in productivity, right? From 100, it's like you're employing 300 people instead of 100, right? That would be amazing. And so businesses like Struber, that's the direction we're going. We're saying let's take all of the people that we've got and give them a superpower and try and make them 3 times more productive so that we can be more competitive, we can do things faster, we can chase things better, we can win more work, we can deliver it quicker, we can deliver it cheaper, all of those things, we're chasing those objectives. An alternative business might have done the opposite. They might have gone, okay, we had 100 people, but I think we can replace 50 of them with AI. And so let's say you're left with 50, and let's say you're also successful in making those 50 people 3 times more productive, 300% more productive. So you'll end up with the equivalent of 150 people. Let's say you've gone from 50 to 150. But those two businesses, the first business is actually operating now twice as fast and twice as productive as the second one, 300 versus 150. So one that's taken the short-term benefit, banked the saving from staff, and even if they get the gain, and they'll probably pat themselves on the back and go, look, we're 50% more productive as well. We went from 100 to 150 now and say, yay, fantastic. But the other business that was over there that said, no, we're actually not going to lose any or many people in this change. We're actually going to supercharge them and we're going to try and get the full maximum productivity benefit and gain all of the returns of operating bigger, faster, cheaper, and smarter than everybody else. And so that's a big difference. Like that's a sliding doors moment where a leader goes, you know what, let's cut our staff and try and gain some AI benefits with the people remaining versus those people that go, actually, we're going to cut no one. We're going to just fully supercharge them and get the maximum productivity gain. Those two businesses can be, a long way apart very quick.
Because you've been in a role before during COVID, where you were in a role where there was a discussion around. And I'm a weirdo. I remember all of this stuff that we've talked about.
You got a great
As
memory.
I'm saying, I'm like, it's strange. It's the recruiter brain. You had spoken about how during COVID there was this question around, do we go all in with the postal side of thing? And I can't remember the details of the journey, or. There's all these big decisions to make when you look at something that's changing. I see AI. I think COVID was a big one there. Tell me a bit about that decision process back then, because that's a really good story too.
It was a good story. So I was at Australia Post. I was an exec at Australia Post, and it was in COVID. And we had, probably many organisations, some existential problems and challenges, early on in the COVID process. Australia Post, not unlike many businesses, we didn't know if we're going to be able to do the business that we do, deliver parcels, deliver letters. We weren't allowed to cross borders. We weren't allowed to, there was problems with holding packages. There was research from overseas saying that postmen that held packages were transmitting COVID. There was all sorts of things. Plus the safety of our staff, not able to run retail outlets. There was a whole thing. Like pretty much everything came to a standstill for a moment. And then, of course, fear. Fear comes in, even at the highest levels. And so the immediate reaction from leaders at that time was, we are going to lose, multiple billions of dollars a year on this trajectory. We need to cut 10,000 staff or some large number. And I was one of the people in the business that kind of went, that's an interesting, one, observation, and two, interpretation of the situation. And so I could see the wheels were in motion already to kind of react to that due to fear, and everyone not knowing what was going to happen. There was an immediate assumption that, yes, we weren't going to be able to run our business and we were going to lose lots of money. So I got a little bit of rope from my executive general manager at the time and asked for 2 weeks. I said, listen, give me 2 weeks. One of my roles was really around commercial strategy, and I had some different views, but I wanted to validate them with some of the business leaders. So I went around the business with one other guy, and we did some internal research really quick. Like within a week or two, we met with basically all the commercial business owners in the organisation. That Australia Post, interestingly, owned about 120 different businesses. So it wasn't just what you think of in Australia Post. They owned lots of businesses. But anyway, we did that, and we came back with some really important insights. One of those insights was that we quickly realised that, in fact, one of the binary outcomes was the determination of whether Australia Post was deemed an essential service versus a non-essential service. And that wasn't necessarily a black and white answer, because all of the different businesses that we had didn't necessarily, they weren't the same, So there was one question of whether letters and parcels was an essential service, and another one whether, some of our digital businesses and some of our other businesses were essential services. So there was a long range of questions. And so we sent, one of our government relations guys down to Canberra. We said, right, you've got one task. You're going to need to go and talk to Minister X, and you need to go and confirm that we're an essential service. If you do that, that's one of the main things that's going to determine whether we are going to be okay or not okay. So he did that. He came back. The answer was yes. All of a sudden, Australia Post were given exemptions. That was hard, but we got it. And the business started flowing. In the meantime, I'd done some analysis and sort of said, well, look, the initial projection was one scenario that could have been true. If everything stopped, we might have lost billions of dollars. I said, but actually there's another scenario. And the other scenario is that if we don't stop, if we're an essential service, and in fact one of the only essential services helping people to communicate, buy products, get food, medicines, you name it. In fact, there's a best case scenario here that we could grow by like 50%. Right, this thing could explode. Like e-commerce could be the only vehicle, for us to society to operate. In the absence of so many other organisations not being able to operate. And then there was kind of a middle, scenario in the middle. And as it turned out, that was what happened. The best case scenario is what happened. Australia Post grew, I'm not sure where it's at in the last couple of years, but it grew like about 20% year on year for about 3 years post-COVID. And when we're coming off a very, very large base of a huge organisation, 20% was unbelievable. I mean, 3% was a big number in that organisation. 20% blew the lid off the organisation, so it was a massive growth period for the organisation, but they were at that sliding doors moment as well, right? That quick reactive decision based on fear could have very quickly resigned them to an outcome that they may have failed, and may have faltered. But in fact, that quick work, that human element to just question, be curious, to do some analysis, which if AI was around at that time, it would have been hugely valuable as well, because we might have been able to do that analysis even faster. But then to actually determine, no, we're in fact doing the opposite. We need to grow like crazy. We need to invest. We need to have more people. We need to go nuts, So it was a great time. It was a fascinating time. Like many businesses, there were just some unique challenges that we faced. But you're right. I mean, those sort of leadership moments, if you react, if you move too fast in the wrong direction, you can make some really seriously bad decisions, So we still need humans in there to just pause, think about things. Are we doing the right thing here? And then make sure when that's settled, then, putting the skates on is going to be much more effective.
Yeah. Awesome example. I still love that story. So, Daryl, one of the questions I always ask is around legacy. So when you think back on your career, your home life, and I guess your impact in the world, what's the legacy you hope to leave for your lives?
Oh, what a wonderful question. Given, my career has traversed many industries, and, I have had the privilege of sort of experiencing different leadership, different ways of working, different ways of winning, different ways of solving problems. My career has always been defined by trying to make a positive difference in the universe, and I feel like I've been able to do that in different places. But part of the value add that I've been able to bring there is that translation of different ways of solving problems, building the confidence that actually we can overcome things or have a different perspective on things than sometimes occurs within an industry silo. Sometimes we get a bit stuck because all we see is what we see. And it sometimes does take people who are able to come with a different perspective, with new ideas, with experience or, a track record of being able to say, actually, I've seen this problem solved somewhere else. It's easy, right? We can do A, B, C, and people are like, I've never even seen that before, So I think that, my legacy is really trying to share knowledge, drive collaboration, and try and enable leaders, especially with technology, to take advantage of the incredible period we're going through in our species, really. I think there's so much opportunity if we use it for good. And so I'm really passionate about trying to, enable that to happen.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Look, we also always ask a rocket round, and I've started to make it up because I get sick of asking the same questions again and again, so I never know what I'm going to ask about. But for you, what's a book that you read that really impacted you?
Well, it's funny you say that. I was only just before looking at that book right there, The Innovators, which I've read before, which was actually an awesome book.
Okay.
Yeah. It's actually a brilliant book, and it tells the story.
Innovator by
Walter Isaacson. Yeah. Before we started, I was looking over there going, I remember reading that book. It was awesome. I actually read it in my Telstra days. I was a GM of innovation at Telstra. And that was one of the books that really, it brings a whole bunch of key innovators, Steve Jobs and a range of other leading innovators in the world, and kind of shares, like I was just talking about there, sharing their way of looking at the world, their perspectives, their different approaches to try and, drive change and innovation. And so that's definitely one book that has really landed with me, and the fact that I recognised it so easily when I first sat down, I thought, that was such a killer book. It was fantastic.
Yeah. I haven't read that one, so it's a great one to recommend. And what's your favourite holiday destination?
Well, great question. So for those that know me, I've just moved to Brisbane from Melbourne, and for the last, I don't know, as long as I can remember with my family, our favourite holiday destination has been Mooloolaba on the Sunshine Coast. So we've been coming up for years as our staple, annual family holiday. We love the beach. We love running along the coastline. The coastline there is just amazing. The food, some great restaurants. Spirit House up in the hills is one of my favourite. It's just, for us, it's just the place that we go where, there are no worries, and we love it.
One thing that's not widely known about you, I'd like you to share with me one of your hobbies.
Wow. Well, golf is my latest hobby, but it's a new one, and I'm hacking my way around trying to become a better golfer. But for one that you might not know, I'll share one that's in common with you, actually. I used to be in a band.
Oh, there you go.
Yes, used to be in a band for many years, probably 10 years, singing and guitar in a cover band primarily. We did a bit of original stuff, but to be honest, we played fun stuff for people more than anything.
Yeah.
That was back in Sydney a long time ago, but I know you also are a singer, probably much better than me. But
I don't know. I took a break too.
Yeah.
I only have just got back into it in the last 2 to 3 years. So come on, Daryl.
I haven't made the resurgence yet. But look, music's always been a passion of mine. It's been something really close to my heart. I learned music as a kid and just played for many, many years. So, yeah, it's probably one that not many people know about.
Well, there you go. And then my question that I always ask is, what makes you feel like you're home?
My family, my wife and kids make me feel like I'm at home. I've become better in my later life. In fact, I would now say I'm good at this, to actually be present. I've had a fortunate career, and I think early in my career I was busy and chasing goals and business, and found it hard to separate, work time and home time and play time, and I've become much better at that in later life. So now I'm definitely when I'm home, and when I'm there for my kids, I try and really be there for my kids and my wife as well, Tessa. So it's that's what makes me feel like I'm at home.
Thanks so much for coming on the podcast, Daryl. It was a great episode. I really appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invite.
If this episode gave you new insights, don't let them go to waste. Take action, apply them. And if you want more insider strategies from the best in construction and infrastructure, make sure to subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, the leaders who open the most doors aren't waiting for opportunities, they're building them.